welcome to this virtual event that is part of Rain Taxi's 2022 Twin Cities Book Festival. I'm Eric Lorber, the director of Rain Taxi. If you don't yet know about us, we are a nonprofit organization that champions aesthetically adventurous literature. I invite you to check out our website anytime after this event to learn more about our quarterly magazine of critical writing and all the other programs we produce to help take readers where writing is going. Tonight's event, like most of our events, is free to attend, but if you're able to pitch in a little something, feel free to use the donate button at the bottom of your screen. Some funding for this festival comes from the Minnesota State Arts Board, but our most vital support actually comes from individual readers. Whether you're a one-time donor or you'd like to become a member and stay in touch with us year-round, we're grateful for your support. And because we are all watching our screens, don't forget there's plenty of ways to participate. You can use the chat column. I know lots of you are already chiming in, saying hello and what's up where you are. Please keep that going. But if you have a question for Jeffrey Archer today, put that in the Ask a Question box. We're going to get to those toward the end of the event. And then, of course, there's that button that says, buy the book. And today, if you buy the book, it's publication day for Next in Line. You will also receive a signed book plate that Jeffrey Archer was kind enough to send over from the UK. Supply chain be damned. We got it on time, and we're ready to send them to you when you buy a copy of Next in Line. With this in my hand, it's such a great pleasure to say welcome to Jeffrey Archer, one of the world's best-selling authors. You'll find out why during this great conversation with Minnesota's own Carl Brookins, a mystery novelist himself and a devoted advocate for the genre and its presence in the world. I'm going to leave these two gentlemen to discuss this fantastic book. And again, I'll return at the end with some audience questions. But for now, take it away, Carl and Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I consider it an honor as well as a pleasure to introduce Mr. Archer to our Minnesota audience and to wherever else people may be tuning into this. One never knows with these virtual affairs what may be going on. I hope we'll keep this as informal and interruptive as necessary in order to do what we need to do. Let me start by saying that for those of you who are unfamiliar with Mr. Archer, and that must certainly be a very great minority of the people watching, that you have written since your first book an enormous number in a variety of genres, and my question immediately is, how do you keep all that straight? And when do you decide what's next is going to be a novel, another William Warwick novel, or a children's book?
Well, the children's books, to be honest, Carl, aren't that important. The breakthrough for me came in the United States when I wrote a book called Cain and Abel. And it sold 1 million copies in the first week and has now been read by 100 million people. That was the breakthrough. So I consider myself a novelist, first and foremost. I wrote children's books for my children when they were 6, 7, and 8. But that was a long, I'm now 82. That was a long time ago. So my life has been as a novelist. And what a privileged and wonderful life I've led and touched so many people throughout the world. That's the privilege. And you have the latest book, Carl. You have Next in Line.
I do. I happen to have it right here.
You have Next in Line, which is a William Warwick book.
Yes.
Now, William was, when he was at school, he wanted to join the Metropolitan Police. And he started life. His father wanted him to go to Oxford and read law and then join him in chambers, because he was a barrister, what we called in those days a QC.
Correct.
And in the last few days has suddenly become a KC. One of the wonderful changes that's come since the sad death of our monarch.
And
So
a relative minor change considering all the other changes that are going to have to be made.
oh yes, vast amount of changes when, I mean, we haven't had a new monarch for 70 years. So the changes are going to be vast. But in this book,
I want
Her Majesty is still on the throne, and he wants to become a detective in the Metropolitan Police, but he has to start his life on the beat. So I decided I would write a series of books where William Warwick started as a constable on the beat, and we will follow him through each book, and you can read any book at any time. There's no order, but he will go from constable on the beat right the way through to commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Now,
although that does not occur. Now, that does not occur yet in this book, does it? But he is almost next in line for that position. And you can see his development and the way his career is developing. I just wondered how you came to this character. Now, I assume you have some people because there are aspects to the law enforcement in Britain, such as royal protection officers, that we do not have in the same sort of manner. And I'd like you to briefly, although it's related because of one of the plot lines of this book, but I'd like you to relate a little bit about that structure for our American audiences.
Yes, in this book, he has moved. He was in the last book. He was head of the murder squad, and then he is asked by the Prime Minister to move on to royalty protection. And because I had a long association with Princess Diana, working in her charity work with her, and in particular as her auctioneer, I'm a charity auctioneer by my hobby. That's my hobby. I decided to remember all the wonderful experiences I'd had with her and put them into the book. So my number 2 detective, Ross Hogan, becomes her personal protection officer, where
Right.
William Warwick is in command of the whole division. And he has a massive responsibility because they discover the head of royalty protection has taken advantage of his position, made himself a fortune, and really broken almost every rule in the book. So while William is dealing with that, Ross is dealing with Princess Diana.
One of the sort of minor subplots. I want you to talk a little bit about Miles Faulkner, because he was to me on the dark side, apart from Booth Watson, a very interesting character, because frankly I see some parallels between his interest in art and his manipulative abilities to a certain author that I'm becoming familiar with in the islands.
Well, Miles Faulkner, I wanted a criminal who was as bright as any policeman and could outthink them. And Miles Faulkner had gone to a school in England called Harrow, which is a great public school. Eton and Harrow are the two best known public schools. He went to Harrow, and when he left school, he discovered he could make more money being a crook than he could being an honest man. So William Warwick is up against him in every book. He's the Moriarty of
I see.
my stories. And
well, he has an interest in art, and he has an interesting wife that he is up, who is I would place her at pretty well equal to him in intelligence and personality. I'm sorry.
And being a crook too. She's a bright woman.
Yes, and being on the wrong side of the law. And
yeah, she doesn't care. And you're quite right. She's extremely bright, and Faulkner's wife, but so is William Warwick's wife, yes. Extremely bright, and the two of them become friends in a rather strange way. One is on the board of an art gallery, and Beth, William Warwick's wife, becomes the director of the art gallery. So they have to see each other, and she can't decide. The wicked Christina can't decide whether she wants to be with her husband, who she knows is a crook, or whether she wants to support Beth. So when the great Rubens is stolen and disappears, she suddenly has to make up her mind which side she's going to help.
Yes, and I thought those scenes with Beth, between Beth and Christina, were really very interesting and the other thing I noticed is there are at least two female police officers in this story who are very strong and very bright and very active, although one of them is wounded, and I appreciate that in this kind of novel because so many of them. And I applaud you for it because so many of these kinds of novels are so male dominant. It's as if
No, I agree.
and I think part of it is because this book doesn't accept, and I don't want to get into the details of it because it would spoil the story, but part of it deals with the action, and most of the action that really works and is really fascinating in this book is intellectual action, rather than it's how do we outfit these guys, and over here are the bad guys saying how do we outwit the good guys, and that to me makes a really worthwhile crime novel to read or to write.
Well, the truth is here, Carl, that I'm married to a very remarkable woman who was chairman of Cambridge University Hospitals and is now chairman of the Science Museum in Great Britain. She's the first woman ever to chair a national gallery or museum, and Her Majesty the Queen made her a dame. She's a dame commander of the British Empire.
Notice
and
that.
So if you think my women are capable and powerful, and they're based on my wife, Mary, and I believe in powerful women. I've supported women's causes all my life. And it's so I'm glad you've spotted that the women, and the other woman who has been advising me was a Detective Sergeant Michelle Roycroft, who I thank in the book, who was in the murder squad for 15 years and in the drug squad for 15 years. She's now retired, and she advises me as well. And I can assure you, she's a very capable, tough woman as well. So I don't forget, I worked with Margaret Thatcher for 11 years. So I'm used to strong women. I like strong women, and they get into my books.
Does your wife read your early drafts of your novels?
No, my wife's a chemist by profession. She read chemistry at Oxford, where she got a first-class honours degree before teaching at Somerville College, Oxford. Scientists are not great on novels, Carl, because everything they do is so demanding to the millimeter. No, she'll read the last draft. She's very well educated, so she looks at the commas and the full stops and makes sure I haven't made any silly mistakes. And she usually picks up a few. No, she's not by nature someone who would even enjoy reading novels, although, to be fair, she's a huge admirer of Jane Austen and Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy. I mean, she has a great classical education as well as a scientific education. But no, she doesn't get. I write 14 drafts.
I noticed that you said that you write that. That's sort of a wet nar with you. It's what you have to have. You feel after it takes up to 14 drafts to be you're comfortable sending it to the publisher.
Correct. I wish I could do it in one draft. I wish I was clever enough.
Don't we all?
No, I do. The first draft will take about 300 hours. And by the time I reach the end, I will have taken 1,000 hours. Anybody who thinks writing a novel can be done either casually, as you well know yourself, Carl, either casually or quickly, are living in a dream world. I always say to young people who come to see me and want to be number one on the New York Times bestsellers list, I say to them, look, go and watch the prima ballerina at the London Royal Ballet. Go and watch the leading violinist in the National Orchestra. Go and hear the leading opera singer in Italy. They don't get there by mistake. It's damned hard work. Talent is very useful. Of course it is. If you can tell a story, that's the God-given gift. But in the end, you've still got to put the work in, as you well know, Carl.
as my wife continued to remind me up until almost the day she died. She was a historian and a writer and an editor, and she essentially forced me to write better, to be a better writer, to pay attention to the details and the things. And you're absolutely right. It's not. It is fun. I find it fun and enjoyable to write, to create the stories, but there is a lot of work involved anyway. And if you want to have a good novel, you want to have a good story, you've got to work at it. You've got to pay attention to it. Yes, indeed.
I agree.
Which leads me almost immediately to a burning question, which most people don't pay attention to the front matter in a novel. And now you know where I'm going. And after the reference to Janet, the acknowledgement to Janet in the beginning, there's a single page with a single question on it, which I would encourage anybody who picks up this book. It's too small to show it to you, and it's only 5 words. But if you read that question at the beginning of the book, I found it stayed with me through the entire novel. But I'm willing to bet that anybody who typically picks up the book and starts at chapter 1 and reads the book and then goes and reads the question, is this a true story? And I want to know, whose idea was that? Was that yours, or was that some great publisher?
No, that's totally my idea. No one else thought of that. The publishers were very pleased with it because I didn't want people to know which part of the Princess Diana story was true and which part of the Princess Diana story I had made up. So I put at the front of the book, is this a true story? And I leave you, the reader, to decide at the end, I think that actually happened to Princess Diana, or I think Jeffrey made it up.
Exactly. Well, and the attack on the proms, that too it has you leave that deliberately with several questions that we can't readily answer. And
you say that, Carl, it's very interesting, but it's only just come out in Britain, but I've already got people saying, is the stolen pepper pot a true story? Is the handbags a true story? Is what happened on the ship a true story? And I say, I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, that's why you read the book and make your own decision. Indeed. So tell us a little bit about, I think we've covered before I go to my next question, give me a brief synopsis of this novel so that people can say, oh, now I understand what those guys are talking about.
Well, it starts with Princess Diana coming to Scotland Yard to see the Black Museum, which of course is a famous rogues museum. And she meets William Warwick and she meets Ross Hogan. So they're in on the first page, but you're not meant to believe at the beginning that's going to be important, because you discover from their commander, who's giving the orders, that they have to investigate royalty protection and what they're up to, because they're taking advantage of the fact that they take care of the royal family, and the royal family don't know what they're up to. So Prince Charles, now King Charles, has no idea. Princess Anne has no idea. And then interweaved comes the story of what happens to Princess Diana because of, well, I'm not going to tell you too much.
Of course not.
Because of something that happens, you have to decide whether that did really happen, because that, in the end, becomes the crux of the tale.
Exactly right. And it's with you through the whole book, and that's the interesting, one of the interesting elements of it. The action, the intellectual maneuvering that goes on, the wonderful play on the systems of law enforcement that Faulkner uses to his advantage at times and is trapped in at other times is all, that's fascinating, interesting. We follow all that, but in the back of your mind constantly is how much of this is real and how much of this is the invention. I mean, it's written, and you look at the dust cover and it says, well, it's a novel. Well, then it must not be true. Well, now wait a minute. And many people would think from my inept description that that gets in the way of the story, but in fact it doesn't. It draws you in even more firmly to which I know must be what you wanted. I mean, it's really a delightful story, and I'm really pleased with it. I maybe we can move on to a few other things that I really like to talk about, and we'll come back to this because, of course, the reason we're here and the reason I'm having the great joy of interviewing you has to do with the publication of this book. This must be your 25th or 26th novel.
That's right. It's I'm 82 years old. I've been going now for over 40 years. It started with Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less.
Yes.
The breakthrough, as I said, came with Cain and Abel, which has now been read by 100 million people. And I've gone on ever since. And like you, I love it. And I will stop the day I don't love it. I really enjoy it. And the joy of writing this particular story and having known Princess Diana and having had the privilege of working with her is 25 years later, I decided I'll let other people know what it was like to be that close to her. But I'll also weave it in with the Wicked Faulkner and my hero, William Warwick, and have a story there so that you can decide how much is true.
Exactly. Yeah, and it in a way you present. It's like, as you mentioned Moriarty earlier, and it's true. There's a definite parallel there. All of the characters, even the most evil characters, with a possible exception of one or two, are really fascinating people that we would like to get to know, as long as there's a certain amount of separation between us.
Yes. Well, I find I don't know if you find this, Carl. I get more letters about the villain than I do about the hero. My letters are based on Mr. Faulkner and have I ever met anyone like that? Have I ever seen anyone like that? And there's William, this wonderful heroic character, dealing with the enemy. But they write him. They write him, and I think they like his wife more than they like Beth. They're fascinated by Beth and how she has got to the very top of her profession and beaten all the men. So no, I think basically people are fascinated by villains, and Faulkner is a very, very clever villain.
He is indeed. How much control do you allow your characters? I have a friend who says, I create these characters and then I listen to them, and the story often flows out of their heads instead of out of mine. Well, of course, we know that these characters are not really. And I have another character who says, absolutely not. Not a word goes down, not an action takes place that I haven't decided for each individual character. Where do you fall in that?
I am in the number one category. In fact, there was one case when I wrote the Clifton Chronicles that the Wicked Virginia was in court. And I thought that morning when I got out of bed at 5:30 to start work at 6, it's time to get rid of the Wicked Virginia. What I will do is I'll put her in the witness box, and my QC, leading lawyer, will kill her. He'll absolutely slaughter her. She'll come out of the other end finished. And I wrote a sentence. I had the great QC asking her a question, and she just batted him straight back. So I thought, that's tricky. So I tried another question, and she just batted it straight back. And I tried a third question, and by the end of 10 pages, the QC, the lawyer, looked like a complete idiot. And Wicked Virginia had defeated him. Now I sat down and thought, well, that's the way the pen took me, that I was surprised. So the reader is bound to be surprised.
Exactly.
And the Wicked Virginia had to go on and on because she survived. And my poor heroine was defeated in that particular case, but she went on to glory as well. There was another twist to come later.
That's what that says to me is the talent that you display in these books is not just the talent that you've grown up with, and your background is varied and interesting and different, and all of that obviously plays into it, but you are sensitive and open to additional kinds of information and ideas that float around out there. And I tend to think that that we live in a world, a cloudy mist of ideas, and some of them we attach to us, and some of them we get to use, and some of them that we don't. We wish we'd kept them and didn't. So I'm pleased to hear that.
But you said earlier, Carl, and I accepted that you had a very clever historian wife who advised you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a great privilege in your country. When I wrote Cain and Abel, my publisher, Simon and Schuster,
Yes.
said, we're going to give you the greatest editor in America. And the great Corley Smith, who had edited J.D. Salinger, was suddenly sitting opposite me. And it was like having a tutorial with an Oxford professor. And so he edited my next 6 books, but he edited Cain and Abel. And I was a young man then, I was in my 30s. And he literally taught me. I was sitting in the presence of one of the great American editors, who had half a page in the New York Times when he died, which will give you a clue about his reputation. And I learned a tremendous amount from him about what readers want and how to deal with things and problems. But I knew what a great man he was when I said to him one day very quietly, what's the difference between a great editor and a great writer? And he said, the first draft. So he knew he was a great editor and could never write a book.
It's interesting because in one of your biographies, he receives a rather disparaging note. Not that he was your editor was an athlete, and I was just looking for I can't find it, but I know that he won some awards as a runner, as an athlete, which has nothing directly to do with the fact that he was a great editor, but it doesn't say that he was a fine editor and renowned in America for his editing. And it's like, oh well, so what, and that's really unfortunate in that particular piece. But it's a pleasure to hear you give him that kind of recognition, because there are so many editors who make really a manuscript that is so full of flaws that the writer perhaps cannot see them, that still has some merit and has some value, and to help the author turn that into a maybe a successful novel, or maybe it's not a novel, maybe it's a historical analysis of some important issue, and in those areas as well, an editor can make or break you, really. Is that what I'm trying to say?
I agree.
Do you always do 14 revisions?
Well, I don't know about you, Carl, but I find there comes a point when I'm only changing maybe one sentence every 3 pages. I'm only changing a word every page. And by then, it's time to give it in to the publishing house and say, what do you think? But I don't like it to go to them until I've reached that stage that I feel I've done the best I possibly can. And that takes about 1,000 hours before they see it. And then we don't exactly begin again, because my editor will say, I want a little bit more of Faulkner. I want a little bit less of, in fact, they came screaming back saying, we want more of Princess Diana. The Princess Diana scenes are so real, and it's so clear you knew her well, that they said, we want more of that. So I wrote 2 new chapters with Princess Diana in them. But that's what a good editor does.
Exactly.
They don't write anything. They tell you what is missing or what is over the top. I've never had an editor who wanted to cut my work. They all want it to go up.
That's interesting. That's a really interesting note. Do you write all the time, every day, wherever you are?
Pretty well 6 to 8 every morning. But if I've got other things to do, like this is publication week in Great Britain, no, of course, I did a couple of televisions this morning and a radio this afternoon and you this evening. So yes, I like to write between 6 and 8 every day, certainly, but there has to be breaks. And after I've done the first draft, as I call it, the 300-hour draft, in January and February, yes, I like to take 2 or 3 weeks off and do other things, my hobbies. I like cricket. I like being a charity auctioneer. I like going to art galleries. So I like going to the theater. So yes, I will do all of that, and then I go back, and the dedicated, damned hard work starts again.
It's, in that sense, it's a job. It just happens to be.
Yes, but we're both very privileged, Carl, because I never look upon it as a job. I
Oh,
enjoy it so much. And when I woke up this morning and pressed the list to see the Amazon list, and it had gone to #1 straight away, that's a thrill for any author on earth to find. In fact, some people say to me, well, what was the great moment among the great moments in your life? I always think, for an Englishman to go to #1 on the New York Times, which I've done 7 times, that 7 of the most thrilling moments of my life, because it's just as hard for an American to be #1 on the London Times.
Absolutely.
Just as hard. So the double is very exciting.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. How did you come to writing in the first place?
Well, I'd wanted to be, when I was a young man, Carl, I went into the House of Commons at the age of 29, far too young, and left at 34 facing bankruptcy because I'd foolishly invested in a company called Aquablast on the advice of the Bank of Boston. Fortunately, I didn't go bankrupt, which was very fortunate. But I did decide to write my first book, Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, the story of 4 young men who decide to steal. They've had their money stolen from them by Mr. Big, and they decide to, Mr. Metcalf, and they decide to steal it back. Not a penny more, not a penny less. They're not allowed to go over the top.
Right.
They steal back that was stolen from them. Now, just in case there are young readers watching this saying, well, how did that go, Jeffrey? The first 12 publishers turned it down. The 13th publisher published it. They sold 3,000 copies in a year. They just about got through the 3,000 copies. And my wife said it was time to get out and find a real job. So then I went on to but as I told you, I apologize for boring you for the 3rd time.
Not being bored.
Enable just changed my whole life overnight. All over the world, that book went to #1 straight away. And it's now, Carl, on its 132nd reprint.
Wow.
Yeah, so don't get disheartened. I'm saying, I'm sure you say it to young people as well, Carl. Don't be disheartened if you 1, nobody wants you, and 2, when they finally do want you, you don't publish many books. Keep fighting. If you believe in yourself, keep fighting.
Where do you think your stories come from? Where I know you have research people who advise you about some of the techniques, law enforcement and things like that. I'm sorry?
They can't tell the story. You're quite right, Carl. Doesn't matter how many researchers you have. It doesn't matter how many things they tell you.
No,
they can't say once upon a time and go for 400 pages. That is a God-given gift.
So it comes to you. So in a sense, you're saying that your ideas sort of come to you out of thin air at times.
Every day of my life. I get a story, I get a mood, I get a twist that it should go in another direction every day of my life. That is the luck side. That is the piece of that I call a God-given gift. The rest, as you know as well as I do, is damned hard work.
Yep. Very interesting. We're going to bring Eric back here in a few minutes because people probably have some questions. I have to stop for just a moment. You stop, take a breath. I'm look through my notes to make sure I haven't missed anything important that I want to ask you. Well, let me put it this way. Have we covered everything that you would like to cover?
I think you've done brilliantly, yes.
No, I just wanted to be sure that there wasn't something that you wanted to talk about that we should.
Well, if I wanted to say anything, it would be to thank the American people for their, I mean, I love America. When I was at Oxford, my closest friend was Bill Bradley, the senator for New Jersey. We were both athletes at the time, and he was an usher at my wedding and one of my dearest friends. I have a lifelong love affair with America. So you can imagine how I felt when one of my books, my first time I went #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list, that we both celebrated greatly. So I have a love affair with your country, slightly puzzled by it at the same time, Carl. I'm slightly mystified by it, and I'm sure a man as intelligent as you will answer this question very quickly and assuredly. Can you explain to me, in a population of 312 million people, how you've been unable to find a woman president? We have had 3 women prime ministers.
Indeed,
and you are still waiting because you're so backward and you're so pathetic. You haven't yet found a woman, because once you do, you'll find out what a great president is.
Well, you know,
Answer the question.
The answer to the question is that we have been a male-dominant society since the very beginning.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
We have not, on the one hand, we have not allowed women as much freedom in that kind of development as we should have, and that's on us. That's on the male population. I think that it takes, however, in that atmosphere, I believe, a very special woman who's willing to give up a whole lot of things, a whole lot of important aspects of life in order to win that kind of thing. I think it'll happen. I think we came very close with Hillary. I think that we should. Lord knows we could use a woman president for any number of reasons. I followed Angela Merkel's career. I thought she did a wonderful job in Germany.
Brilliant career.
I think that, and yes, while I did not really agree with a good deal of I forgot her name now. Your primary, the most well-known. Margaret Thatcher. Thank you. My daughter is with me, and at my age, this is one of the problems I'm having. I'm turning 90 in a few days.
Oh, bravo!
Yes, thank you. I'm pleased to a certain degree, but it is, my brain is rotting, and at least my memory.
You've done brilliantly.
But while I did not agree with many of the policies that Margaret Thatcher proposed, it was and is always, I think, most instructive and most valuable to have women in those important positions in government, because they bring something that we males simply do not understand.
I quite agree. I quite agree.
Do the job. And indeed, that's one of the reasons why I read a great many women authors.
Well, some of the finest authors the world has ever known.
Well, hello. You've noticed.
And many of them. Many, many, many of them. I mean, we're still dominated in England by Agatha Christie. We still hold Jane Austen above all. And we should. And we should. As we should. You're quite right.
And in my field, the field of crime fiction, we have there are a number of British authors. Don't ask me to name some because I won't be able to remember them, but I'm aware of them, and I read them, and as well as a number of American authors. Well, let's get Eric back in here and deal with whatever it is we need to deal with here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What a riveting conversation, touching on so many elements of this book and of fiction in general. Reminding our listeners out there, next in line, you can purchase this today. If you do that, you'll get a signed bookplate, signed by Jeffrey Archer. Think about it as a gift too, because as you're learning, this is a rich, rich novel. We do have questions out in the audience, and one of them is about writing, Jeffrey, you've touched on so many aspects of your process, but let's go a little bit further, because one of the elements of fiction you're particularly renowned for is plot, and people are curious, how do you structure that plot? Do you outline? Do you have the ending in advance? How do you know when that first draft is done and now you've got the 13 more to fine tune? Yeah.
Well, Carl hit on this, and he's quite right when he said there's two types. There's those who put yellow stickers on the wall and know where every chapter is going. I haven't got a blooming clue. I get up in the morning and pray that the next chapter will come. I am literally a storyteller. The next chapter will come. I sometimes wonder if the good Lord will look down on me and say, not today, I'm fed up with you. But no, they still keep coming. So I am the intuitive type. I don't have yellow stickers on the wall. I pray. Of course, there are times when it goes in the wrong direction or goes in a different direction, but there are two types. I am one. Now, John le Carré, great writer, he had everything mapped out even before he started. And he told me that he knew almost every detail before he started. So we were exact opposites.
Interesting. And yet, both end up with these rich and complicated plots. So there's no one right path to the.
I have to interrupt. There's an English author, and I'm sorry, I can't think of her name, who told us once in a meeting, I can wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to work on chapter 34 because I know exactly what's going to be in chapter 34 or in chapter 12. And I said, that's fine.
That's mad.
It's also bad.
It's mystifying.
But we're all different. What that proves, Carl, is we're all different. There are no rules. You pick up your pen. Some people type. Some people get up early. They're larks. Other people are late. They're owls. We're all different. What you should do is what suits you.
And you should do it.
Yep.
Yeah. Amen. And then the other side of that coin, and we love to remind our audience that virtually every great writer we've talked to, also a devoted reader. Jeffrey, what do you particularly like to read? And we've heard some,
my favorite author of all time, and when I grow up, it's what I want to be. I want to be Stefan Zweig when I grow up. I think he is the greatest writer in my lifetime, greatest writer storyteller. His own tragic committing suicide in New York was a terrible moment in literature because he only wrote 2 novels. His nonfiction is considered absolutely brilliant. But Beware of Pity by Stefan Zweig, in my idea, is the great novel in the last 100 years. Now, of course, there are many authors one would like to talk about, but I discovered him at the age of 70 through an Indian fan who wrote to me and said, you are my second favorite author. So I immediately wrote back and said, what do you mean I'm your second favorite? I was your first favorite author. And she wrote back and said, you should read Stefan Zweig. And I read him and thought, yep, that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be Stefan Zweig. He's very, he's very, very special.
I couldn't agree more, and delighted that our audience has this great recommendation from a master storyteller himself. Jeffrey, thank you for spending this time with us. Carl, thank you for engaging our guest. It's always great to have one writer talk to another, and wishing you both the best, and Jeffrey, all the best as the celebration of Publication Day of Next in Line continues deep into the night there in England for you.
Thank you also, Eric. Very kind of you to have me on the show. And thank you, Carl. And may you live to 100.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it.